Morning on BizTech Conversations. Today we have our guest on our special Merdeka edition, Leslie Lopez. Leslie is the regional correspondent for the Singapore Straits Times, and we're going to be speaking about a very interesting topic. Is Mahathir relevant? And we're going to talk about it his political and economic legacy. Welcome to the show, Leslie.
Thank you, Brian.
Now, Leslie, Merdeka is a very special time for all of us, but it's a very turbulent time now in Malaysia. What are your thoughts in terms of Mahathir's legacy and how that has impacted Malaysia today?
Clearly, Mahathir has had a major impact on this country, especially the last 20 years since the 80s. I think this time around, following his second coming as Prime Minister, we're seeing a kind of dimming of Mahathir's legacy, checkered, no doubt. And I think people are beginning to really question what was Mahathironomics, from Mahathironomics to his political position, his political style, and its impact on the country today. I think people are starting to see that he's had a major impact, but not all that good.
Okay, let's talk first about his political impact. He's known as a Prime Minister slayer. So essentially, since Tun Hussein on, he has been responsible for appointing and then ousting each of his successors.
True. So if really that is the case, and what I think we can deduce from all of this, or come to a conclusion, is that he's been quite a bad judge of character, actually, picking the wrong people all the time. So each time he picks someone, then he moves to oust them. Mostly, in each case, is because they're not doing his bidding.
And correct. Well, the thing is, I would argue that it was not a bad judge of character. It's just that because they refused to do his bidding post elevation to prime ministership, they were no longer relevant to him.
So, but the thing is that after he gave up the premiership, that didn't mean that he was, it was the responsibility of the next leader. I mean, this thing that Mahathir is the end all of Malaysia is clearly not the case. And we've seen, I think, the flaws, the pitfalls in that kind of view. Malaysia hasn't been able to move forward, get out of this Mahathir shadow since the 80s. And we're still paying the price for that. And I think that's where the question of his relevance is starting to be given a lot more critical kind of examination. Previously, everyone lent soft focus to Mahathir. He was father of development, father of this, father of that. But today, everyone is 2020 is a prime example. He had his vision of this country by 2020, a Malaysian race. Today, the communities are more fractured than they've ever been before, not just among the Malays, but also among the non-Malays too. We've seen, racial polarization at its worst, and so these failures will be examined now. And I think in the dimming of his years, this late Mahathir's years, people are going to give it a more critical examination, and particularly people are going to ask themselves, just like talking about leadership, is what was it all to Malaysia about this 2 decades fight that he had with Anwar? Still refusing to, the last time around, it was to give Anwar the job. That was the agreement. But he reneged on that, and that led to the paralysis that we are facing today.
No, of course, and so your argument is that the last 20 years, because of this vendetta against Anwar, that's detracted and distracted him from everything else.
I think,
and doing the good that perhaps he had set out to do earlier in his reign.
Anwar was always there for a long time. He was in 1998, after he was sacked in jail. I think he remained this kind of force that brought the opposition together, did something, but it was never enough to cross that bar. Mahathir joining the opposition actually, I think, to a large extent, helped the opposition win the last election.
Yeah, and
Okay.
also I think one of the things that he doesn't get enough credit for, and the bloodless transition of
True.
power, and that I would attribute solely to Mahathir's
I don't think so. I think you have to give that to Malaysians. It's Mahathir may have led the opposition, but the thing is that the reason why this didn't happen, unlike other countries, you have to. It's credit to Malaysians and to Malaysia. To credit to our institutions, from the armed forces, the police,
But again-
the royalty.
But again, I would argue with you, Leslie, it is because of the presence of Mahathir that everyone was willing to, again, and that is the unseen influence of Mahathir,
True.
the statesman, the various actors in the political sphere, in the legal sphere, and also from Najib as well, to transition power to the new government. Now, without the presence of Mahathir, I think he would have been less comfortable to do so.
Well, you see, I mean, that's, we can argue that it was Mahathir, but I don't think for a country to go through something that's painless, seamless, in this power transition, and it's never happened in our country, the handover of power.
Yes,
It's never happened.
it's never happened.
So the thing is that I think I wouldn't credit one man for that. I would credit the nation for that, the institutions that we have. So to give one man credit for, especially when you take his record, a very checkered record. So to give him credit for something this important, I don't think is really. I would be reluctant to do so, because I have more faith in Malaysians and the institutions of this country to do the right thing, and which I think you can argue that happened. So I wouldn't give one man the credit, because when it came to, say, take 1998 for example, I mean, he's never stopped at jailing his critics, jailing his
And then from Ox Lalang
exactly.
and before that as
so I
well,
think
yeah.
so I think thinking of taking on draconian steps, to stop democratic kind of changes in power. He was known to do that. He was no great democrat. Far from it. And I think Malaysians really wanted change, and so the change happened. And I would be reluctant to credit one man for this.
And how do you now describe this current very muddled state of affairs? We have Pejuang just being launched. We have Mahathir's protege Syed Saddiq launching a youth-based party, obviously to take advantage of the demographic changes that have just happened with our electoral votes, where 18-year-olds will be allowed to vote. We have a fractured UMNO with up to 5 different main factions. We have the Muhyiddin and the Bersatu party basically clinging on to power by a handful of votes. What are your thoughts on this at this point of time, and how Mahathir could play the role moving forward?
Well, I think it is becoming increasingly apparent that Mahathir's role as any kind of a glue that will bring people together has been diluted. I mean, from would-be reformer to bringing about change, he's today seen as a spoiler. He broke the Pakatan Harapan coalition. Not happy with it, he resigned without even consulting his coalition partners, and he wanted to forge a unity government, which the king refused. And from having a majority today, he is isolated with his own party kicked him out. Bersatu. He's isolated, trying to forge a new party. Clearly, whether it's a uphill battle, and I think the recent by-elections in Slim showed that, there's very little traction for Mahathir today. So I think what we have today is, if you take Mahathir's side, we have a very divided Malay political landscape.
Yeah, because one of the things is if we just look within UMNO, if Mahathir were to die today, and elections are called today, and they've got to decide on a new prime minister, who would they pick?
Well,
it would be a tough thing because there's 5 different factions, each vying for.
Well, so I don't think we can assume that UMNO is going to emerge as the single largest party. I think the Malaysian
the signals and the UMNO stalwarts would use the slim elections as an example of the strong mandate that they potentially have in the grassroots.
Well, you see, the thing is that we've had 12 by-elections now, and all of those by-elections have gone against the Pakatan Harapan government that won the last elections. And I think that's I don't see that as complete support for the previous government, Barisan. I see it as a protest vote that the Pakatan Harapan coalition did not deliver on its promises. In the last 22 months, I don't think you can check on any single box that they've delivered on anything. So people are, I think there's this frustration with this change that was given to Pakatan, and they did not deliver on it.
But Leslie, I would argue that 22 months was so little time to enact the kind of reforms that were really needed. When you do a business turnaround, for example, there is a period where the business will probably go down because you're cleaning up shop, and then after that you have a period of growth again when everything the business is streamlined, it's stabilized, and then you position yourself for growth. I would argue that they just didn't have enough time.
But you see, it is here is where I think the problem lied with the Pakatan Harapan. The Pakatan Harapan, while pledged for change, but it is very hard to enact change when your prime minister is the guy whose policies you want to change. So there's always opposition. There's always opposition. So the new government, the PH government, found it difficult to implement the reforms because they were up against the man who basically set Malaysia the way it is today. So they couldn't do it. But that is something that was something that Pakatan Harapan needed to deal with. But for the ordinary voter who is going through a number of challenges, this is just not delivering. So you cannot blame. The Malaysian voter was just sending out the message to Pakatan Harapan: get your act together, get your act together. And I think that message has been delivered consistently in the by-elections that we've seen. So, but there is no gauge, I think, for what could happen in a real general elections. Like I would argue that, the economic challenges that we are going to go through in the coming months, in the next 3 to 6 months, are going to be something that we've never seen before.
And before you go on to that point, Leslie, let's talk about Mahathir's legacy, economic legacy. And starting with the industrialization period in the 80s, when he first came to power, we've had now time to, basically the benefit of hindsight, to look at his track record. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you take Mahathir's central platform of his economic initiatives, it has been heavy industrialization, privatization, and heavy industrialization and privatization. And I don't think you can name any single success today. But money has been spent, poured through so many ventures that you cannot even say that were successful.
But I think I beg to differ on that because, Leslie, let's look at and Proton is a mixed bag. The whole idea of Proton, for example, was supposed to give us an industrial base, because the automotive industry at that time, for many countries like Japan and Korea, was a catalyst to basically grow a parts base and manufacturing base. In terms of its impact on the ordinary Malaysian citizen, of course, we ended up paying a lot more money for substandard cars coming out from Proton initially. And but the thing is, I would argue that it created a lot of jobs. It also then created a lot of separate companies as well, and it also gave people confidence then to foreigners to invest in Malaysia. That FDI program during the heydays of the Mahathir period were quite substantial. We were one of the Asian tigers. We were seen as, you know, one of those countries that were on our way to 2020. However, in the last 20 years, or in fact post 1998, when I think was the last time we had a budget surplus after Anwar was sacked as finance minister, we've seen a really steady decline in our foreign direct investment. Also, the engine for growth, unfortunately, and this is also the tainted legacy, which kind of alludes to what you were saying, of his industrialization program. We've grown essentially in the last decade in particular purely on priming. There was very little foreign investment compared to our neighbors, and we use that as a benchmark, like Vietnam, who've come out of nowhere in the last decade. And many critics and economists will argue that they will surpass us in the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, certainly that seems to be the case, and I think, you know, if we just had to take one example, let's take Proton. It's one you mentioned. You know, this notion of, you know, trying to follow the Japanese, South Korean model of developing your own auto industry. They were basically able to produce, you know, with their own technology. We failed with the transfer of technology with Japan.
Yes.
And then tried now going with Geely. Now, the thing is that a good example is to see the path that Thailand took. Thailand decided not to pursue a national car. We pursued two national cars,
yes.
Pro Dua and Zangota. And, you know, we can see where that took us. Thailand decided, instead of pursuing a national car project, they decided to become the parts maker and also manufacturing hub for all motor companies. So that brought in all that investment. So it's a kind of tale of two cities. Which kind of model you go for? The Thailand model clearly has shown
that it's a superior outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is kind of failed because of nationalism. You want to. I think Mahathir wanted to control, and he clearly that was a part that was flawed. You know. So we see that now. I think the other thing that you brought out about we spending our way out of trouble, which we've done over since 1998. That's going to come to a very, very jarring halt in coming months because, you know, the government is facing a huge crippling deficits.
Yeah, and they've raised the deficit ceiling to 60%
So, but
now.
how much can you spend out of your trouble? And even in 1998, with the weakened currency, we were able to export our way out of our problems. SMEs became a great crutch to the economy. Today, we are facing a time when global demand, because of the coronavirus pandemic, is very, very weak. So exporting ourselves out of trouble is not an option. Number two, how much more can we pump prime? You know, how many projects, how many roads can we build to nowhere? You know? So all of this is going to come, and we are now looking at an economy that really has very few, multipliers, sources of growth. You know, previously we had exports. All prices are down now. You know, commodity prices are down too. So all of this is going to come to a halt. And then I think the other big issue, which I think needs to be highlighted, is when the moratorium ends on
end of September.
September, when people have to start repaying the loans for corporates and households. And that is going to have a huge impact against a very, very challenging business environment. So how do we deal with this? And then you have government paralysis. You know, so we're going forward after this Merdeka, facing challenges that this country has never faced before. You know, but I think the amazing thing that, you know, this is a real crisis situations, but we moving ahead without any kind of tension is a plus for the country. That I think people will realize, Malaysians will come together and say, look, we need to solve this. So
and the thing is, and you're right, one of the things that we need right now in a crisis is clear leadership. Pull us out of that, pull the rabbit out of the hat, literally, at that point of time.
Yes, but yes, I agree with that, and I think you needed strong leadership. But times have changed. Malaysians, the Malaysian voter today is a much sophisticated subject. She, they've got different aspirations. They don't hold to the notion that there's this inbuilt loyalty to UMNO, to Barisan Nasional. People look at change today, and that's happening all over the world.
So you think that, and obviously there's a lot of talk about a snap election in the next coming months. So your view is that the rural Malay voter is not loyal to UMNO?
Yes, I'm saying that it is going to be tested like never before. I think there are a number of reasons for it. I think we have very little appreciation of the kind of pain people are going through, especially in the rural areas. Like, let's take for example Kelantan. I grew up in Kelantan, and it's a state today where they rely a lot on remittances from young Kelantanis who work, say, in Johor, where they travel to Singapore daily, work in urban areas in the Klang Valley, and send money back. So like rural economies, and I mean there are really no more rural economies in Malaysia, in Peninsular Malaysia at least. Most of them are either urban or semi-urban, very few rural, but they rely on these remittances. I'm sure there's been a big hit in Johor because people can't do that daily commute to work in Singapore.
Absolutely, I'm from Johor,
exactly.
and if you go to the Johor Bahru today, the roads are empty.
Exactly. So clearly that, apart from having an impact on the Johor economy, Johor Bahru economy, it has an impact on places like Kelantan and all. That is underreported. It's underreported.
Yes.
So I think this is where we probably have very little appreciation for. So to the normal, sophisticated Malaysian voter, not being able to deliver and to give you, to provide for you, politics is about how far you can stretch that tent, a tent of providing for people. And I think this thing is going to be tested. UMNO could do it before, but today we don't have the resources anymore. Governments don't have the resources, and we're seeing that this belt tightening, and I think the crisis that is unfolding now, the economic challenges that we're going to face, is going to test that. It's going to test that rural voter. So that's where I think the next challenge we're going to see, and it, like you said, what Malaysia will need to kind of come forth, to surface in this time of challenging time, is leadership. And I think the only thing is that you can hope that political leaders, as divided as they are, decide to come together in some kind of understanding, pick someone among them, and say we have to move forward. That is going to be our challenge. And I think Malaysians need to hope for some kind of maturity among our political leaders, that they'll be able to see beyond their own vested interests and vested interests of their own constituencies, their own support base, and move and basically be mature enough to accept that, look, this country is going through a very, very hard time, and they need to come together. And that, I think, is the big challenge as we go.
Leslie, this was a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for joining us on BizTech Conversations. That was Leslie Lopez, regional correspondent for the Singapore Straits Times. I'm Brian Fernandez for BizTech Conversations. Please check us out on www.biztech.asia for business and technology conversations.